In this video, I would like to show you my favorite game of Hikaru Nakamura playing with the black pieces against a very strong grandmaster from Poland. His name is Michal Krasenkov, and this game is considered to be Hikaru's immortal game. So let's get ready for the action. It's just going to be absolutely insane. What you're going to see, amazing sacrifices, mating attack, that's what you are looking for. So before we do that, just make sure that you subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments also what is your favorite game of Hikaru Nakamura, and would you like to see it covered on this channel? Just let me know. Please subscribe to the channel as well. I will really appreciate that. Michal Krasenkov, as I said, is a very strong grandmaster from Poland. He used to be 2700 in his prime and top 10 player in the world. He opens the game with the move knight f3, and Hikaru goes for knight f6, c4, e6, and we do get to see some sort of Catalan type of structure with the bishop coming to g2, bishop e7, castling kingside. And now, of course, if you would play here the move d2, d4, we have the main line of the Catalan. But a different setup for white is not to place the pawn on d4, at least not for the moment, but instead push the pawn to b3 and aim for the so-called double fianchetto. Black has different ways of responding. There are different type of setups available. The move a5 is quite interesting, as you sometimes have ideas to grab space on the queen side and challenge that pawn on b3 to get the rook involved. But white goes knight c3, covering the a4 square, so the pawn has been brought to halt. Black goes c6, white goes d4, and now we are back in some sort of mainline setups with pawns on d4 and c4, and very soon we will see that white is going to occupy the center with its other pawn as well. Knight bd7, queen c2, b6, and here white goes e4. So that was the main idea, to place the knight on c3 and the queen on c2 to support the pawn coming to e4. If black were considering to take the pawn on e4 after knight takes e4, I think these sort of positions, they definitely favor white. Why? Because of the space advantage, the open diagonal. White's light squared bishop is usually better than the bishop on c8. So what black is considering to do here is just try to maintain that pawn on d5. It's part of the strategy to keep fighting for central control. And instead, the move bishop a6 is played. Very interesting idea, so that you're pinning the pawn on c4. White is not recommended to take on d5, as the rook on f1 would be hanging. And the question is, what is white going to do in such positions? Well, a typical move here would be to expand in the center with the move e5, attacking the knight. The knight will have to go away, but very soon the knight will find its way back into the game. It will go to c7, hoping to prepare either c5 or b5 at the right moment and looking for counterplay, because since white has advanced the pawn to e5, the pressure against the pawn on d5 is not as strong as it is when the pawn is still on e4. White played here the move knight d2, overprotecting the pawn on c4 and opening up the diagonal for its bishop. And now, the main drawback of this move is very nicely shown by Hikaru, as the knight on f3 usually has some nice control over the central squares d4 and e5, but with the move c5, black is exerting pressure against the pawn on d4. There's a serious threat of taking the pawn right now. If you would take the pawn on c5, the idea for black is not to recapture immediately, but first play the move d4, attacking the knight on c3, and on the next move you're going to take back on c5, and then you have a nice passed pawn in the middle of the board. So white has to look for a different plan, and played here the move e takes d5. White is controlling that square, but black is going to take the pawn on d4. So things are heating up now, and at this point the knight on c3 is under threat. White got to do something about it. And where would you go with a knight? For instance, if you would play knight e2, it was not seen in the game, but I'd like to show you the following idea. The black's idea now is to go ahead here with the move e5, creating protected passed pawns And after, for instance, d6, with a discovered attack on the rook and the bishop, black is really willing to sacrifice the exchange. With bishop takes d6, bishop takes a8, queen takes a8, you're an exchange down, but you have fantastic piece play, particularly on these light squares. The queen can come back into play. You can set up a battery with queen and bishop on the light squares. And together with ideas of advancing the pawns in the center, things are looking horrible for white. So therefore knight e2 was not played in the game, and instead knight b5 was played. E takes d5 on the board, and obviously white cannot really move the pawn from c4. That would be a big mistake because the knight on b5 is hanging. So white's idea is now to take the pawn on d4, and you see still that the pawn on d5 is pinned. You may consider taking on c4, sacrificing the exchange, but the main problem is that white is also contemplating to jump in with a knight to c6, forking the queen and bishop. So therefore black tries to solve both problems by playing the move rook c8, getting out of that diagonal with a rook, and pinning the pawn on c4. So what is black intending to do? Well, as I said, you cannot use your c-pawn. So taking on d5, knight takes d5 is a big mistake. You cannot recapture with your c-pawn as the queen is hanging. But if we're not going to do anything, black is about to play here the move b6, b5 to intensify the pressure against the pawn on c4. White played rook e1. It's probably not a good move. As I said, b5 is the idea of black, and maybe a4. Preventing that move would have been a wiser decision for white. But rook e1 on the board, and now b5. Massive pressure against the pawn on c4, which is attacked by both these pawns and the bishop and the rook as well. White goes for the move bishop to b2. And now black went for the move rook e8, overprotecting the bishop on e7, so that if it's needed, you can move your queen. And you may have thought, okay, there's this possibility to take on c4, but you're not in a rush as the pin is still there. And white thought, okay, I better move my queen. So to clarify the situation, you're ready to take now on b5, for instance. So now it's up to black to take the pawn on c4. B takes c4, and the queen comes into b6, attacking the bishop on b2. Rook b1, protecting the bishop and setting up a battery against the queen. D takes c4. And now black is just a pawn up. This looks very nice, but okay, if white would play a reasonable move like bishop c3, attacking the queen and neutralizing the advance of black's c-pawn, things are far from simple, and it's absolutely a game still, because I think if you purely compare the minor pieces, white's minor pieces are definitely not worse than black's. However, we are entering a sort of sharp middle game, open position. All the pawns in the center are gone. So that means that there are tactical possibilities. White played here the move knight c6, attacking the bishop on e7, but also there are plans of taking on f6 with the bishop so that you're attacking the queen at the same time. Look, rook takes c6 is on the board, and now white's idea is of course not to take back with the bishop on c6. After queen takes c6, black has two minor pieces for the rook. With bishop b7 coming next, looks as if white's position is falling apart. But white consciously went for this line, and rather than taking back on c6 with the bishop, there followed bishop takes f6, and this is a discovered attack on the queen. Materials even, okay, black is a pawn up, but the big threat here is also to take on e7, while also the rook on c6 is hanging. So here, big moment. What is black going to do? Pause here for a second, and hopefully you can come up with a brilliant idea, because it's because of the next move by black this game became so famous, and it's considered to be Hikaru's immortal game. You're under pressure, everything is hanging, but there is one amazing shot which was probably just not taken seriously by Krasenkov, or just simply overlooked. As look at the following move. You're not taking back on f6. The queen is hanging, and you don't get enough compensation for the queen. If you take back with the bishop on f6, there is rook takes e8, also does not make any sense. If you take with the rook on f6, it's rook takes b6. And all these lines, you're losing the queen. So you cannot really do that. But what you're doing here, look, queen takes f2. Forcing moves, always look at checks. With the idea that, okay, you have to take the queen, of course. You want to take the queen. If you go into the corner with the king, you just take with the queen on f6 and your rook is protected. If you take on c6, it's queen takes c6 with a crushing attack against the white king. So this looks just really, really bad. After queen takes f2, critical move is king takes f2. We want to see what is going to happen now. And very tempting is just to take on f6 with your rook, with check. But the king will hide in the corner. And the big difference is now that the light squared bishop is still guarding the king. So you don't have enough material to launch an attack against the white king. Instead, we got to anticipate the movement of white's king. And bishop c5 check is a great idea. Because what are white's plans now with its king? If the king would go back, for instance, to f1, then the idea is not to take on f6 with the rook. Because after bishop to f3, you're able to run away with your king and consolidate your position. But instead, the move c3 first, that is the key move. Because this bishop on a6 gives a check. And if the rook is going to block, I mean, there are no other sensible moves. There is the move c2 with an attack on the queen against the rook. Bishop takes e2 is there. Black is regaining a lot of material and it's just game over after this. So after bishop c5, the alternative is to run up the board with your king. King f3, but now rook takes f6 with check. And you see that black's pieces are wonderfully working together. The only square the king can go to is g4. And now the big question is, does black have something here? And well, we need to keep looking for checks. If you're playing a slow move, white's going to play rook takes e8. But Nakamura has calculated this, of course, all. And is looking at more checks. And the key idea is to get this bishop involved one more time. Because in the other line, we saw that c3 followed by letting the bishop join the attack was a key idea. But now white's king is far away from that diagonal. So we would like to get this bishop here with check so that we deprive the king from going to any other squares. Knight e5, that is the move black is looking for. Was played in the game. It's a check. You got to move the king, or you can eliminate that knight on e5 with rook takes e5. Typical defensive strategy, of course. When your material up, you can return some part of that advantage. But rather than recapturing on e5, bishop c8 check. That is a brilliant move. And if you go forward with your king, it's rook takes e5, and this looks absolutely crushing. If you play king to h4, there will follow rook takes e5, and there's not much white can do against the threat of rook h6, because this bishop covers some very important light squares. The king can't go anywhere. This is game over. I have one other line, is instead of king move, there's rook f5, but now after bishop takes f5, the king can go to h4, rook h6, king g5, and simple move here would be just to drop back with the bishop to c8, preparing bishop e3 check. Once again, the king is lacking any support. There are no pieces around it, no pawns to cover it. So bishop e3 is coming with mate on the next move. So that's game over. Let's go back to the game. After knight e5, not rook takes e5 played, but king g5, rook g6 check. And now we got to see where's the king going, either to the h or to the f file. In the game, king h5 was played, but after king f5, it's bishop c8 check. The bishop joins again. King e4, and one interesting move here is rook d6 to cut off the king, prepare a beautiful check. If king f4, knight d3, for instance, beautiful check. If the king goes away, let's say to g5, Now my plan is to take on e1 and grab a lot of material, while if the queen takes on e1, hoping to give back some material, the easiest move here is rook g6. The king can only go to the h-file now anyway. King h5, rook h6, and after king g5, it's the move f6, and that's just checkmate. The reason we decided to take first on e1, by the way, is that if you don't do it, if you go rook g6, immediately king h4, the queen is still able to interfere. But when starting with rook takes e1, you see that it's just absolutely crushing, and everything is hanging. So in the game, king h5 was played. Now, various interesting moves, but it's very important to realize that although white is a queen up versus a rook, the king has almost no square to go to. It's caught at the edge of the board. And with the move f6, you set up huge mating threat of rook h6, because the pawn covers the g5 square and the knight covers the g4 square. That is a big threat. Here again, there are only two options for white. If you give a check on d5, looks as if not much is going to change. But the idea could be to interfere with your queen on h5, giving back some material. That could be a way trying to hold on. But now g5 is the killer move. It's a check, and after king h3, rook takes h5. It's not checkmate, because we inserted this bishop d5 check. The king can still go to g2. But if we look at the position, black is just a piece up. That looks crushing for black, with an ongoing attack still. So instead of bishop d5, white thought, let's remove an attacker by taking on e5. Now rook h6 is not made because of king to g4. Rook takes e5 check. King gotta go to h4. And here another key moment in this game. It's a queen versus a rook, but once again the king is just caught at the side of the board, and you got to be careful if you start giving checks. This is a typical amateur mistake. The king will be unable to get back into play, and things are not easy at all. It seems as if white is just gonna survive, as the king may go to the e-file, or you can block with knight e4. So instead, just pause here for a second and realize that white cannot do too much here. Maybe if white were to play rook b8 could be an idea. But with the next move, you are taking away squares from that white king, and bishop c8 is a beautiful move as you cover the light squares. And now obviously rook h6 is a strong threat, because after queen h5 you can just take it with your other rook, and the king is in the mating net. So bishop c8 is an absolute killer move. Beautiful idea. White played here the move g4, hoping that the king is able to run away. But after bishop f2 check, the king got to go back to h3. And now it's rook h6 with checkmate. What an amazing game. Very strong grandmaster, rated 2668 at that time, getting crushed in only 30 moves. Thanks to that beautiful queen sacrifice, queen takes f2. In my opinion, this is Hikaru's best game ever played, but I might be wrong. If you have any other ideas, what you think, what could be nice to cover on the channel, let me know, and I'm gladly going to accept your idea. So thanks for watching, and see you soon again. Bye bye.